Hello guys and girls, welcome back again to the third video in this series. This time we are looking at the MSM Terrier MSR, which is the top spec of a British hot hatch built in the early 2000s. As you can see here, we've got all the bits already sorted. You know how this goes. By this point we will go over the chassis bits and pieces and then jump straight into it. So double wishbones, I decided to go front and rear double wishbone once again. This is the third car that's been double wishbone front and rear. I have a theme going on, primarily because I have plans in the future to all-wheel drive, probably rally car this thing at some point. But I also decided this time around, instead of building the base model on camera, we're going to build the top spec version on camera, so you guys can actually see a little bit more of a cooler car. Instead of here's a commuter car, here's a commuter car, here's a a K car, here's a hatchback, here's just an inline six muscle car. So we're going to be focusing on different trims for these videos now instead of just the base models, and there's also a shake up to the tier system which I'll show later. But for now we will go ahead, jump to the speed build and get right into it. Jumping into yet another speed build, so this time of course the MSM Terrier MSR. Now this is slightly different to the other one because I had to spend, instead of the previous one, because I had to spend all my time trying not to make a Honda Civic. So here of course I'm using those lights that everybody seems to use. They are pretty good for this sort of thing. I had an idea in mind. I wanted sort of like an angular, aggressive, very much early 2000s hatchback. I went on something that you'd see in like the compact series in Burnout 3, and that was the idea with this car. Really was just going off of the vibes of those cars, trying to get something that looks reminiscent of it but also not completely the same. The colour actually was picked from the custom compact from Burnout 3, the maroon colour. It's sort of like a maroon and white livery in that game, but I took the maroon, thought it looked really good in automation, so there we are. But as any good sports model car goes here, you've got lots of vents in the front, adding some weird body molding bits. They just look good. I don't know, I didn't like them originally but decided later on to keep them. They kind of grew on me. But this car was relatively easy. I think actually this footage you're seeing here is condensed down only from about 45 minutes, whereas the Canary took about hour and a half, I want to say. It was a lot longer than this, but so I was quite surprised at how quick this car took. But to be fair, hatchbacks aren't really, people might kill me for this, but they're not the most entertaining vehicles in the world. And so I was looking at it for quite a few moments. You'll see a few pauses in the footage here, and I go, is this really everything I could do? And it turns out, yes, there wasn't really a lot else I could add to it without over designing it, so to speak. So we're going through the motions here, giving it a wide body. I did originally, you'll see shortly, add some side skirts. I spent ages looking through pieces trying to find some side skirts, and then when I exported it to Beam for the first time, they have terrible hitboxes, these ones. They dragged across the floor and everything. It ruined the car's performance. So in the end I had to swap them out for different pieces, so the car may look slightly different when you see it in Beam, because there were certain little bits and pieces I had to change to make it work. I always do some initial testing with these cars before I actually show the footage, just so I know that they work and I can make any necessary tweaks without having to do that on camera. So with the rear as well, went for some custom lights, but this time not completely built from scratch, thank the Lord, because those take ages. So we went with just some standard cutouts to colour them in glass and then filled in little bits just to make them look good. These were really just basic. I mean, the whole car is basic. Even this performance variant, is basic. It's, I mean, I had quite a lot of fun designing it, and I think it looks quite good, even though a lot of the fixtures are pre-made. There wasn't necessarily a lot of wizardry going on. I think with automation cars, people can get quite sucked into over designing them, and even sometimes the community as a whole, tends to favour over designed cars that they've taken a millennia to make. But sometimes you just need simple stuff, and I think if it looks good, and if you think it looks good, and then you're happy with it, then I think that works. That's awesome. That's very, very cool. So also had a fight here trying to decide which wing I wanted. I definitely wanted a wing of some description. I like this carbon one here. I thought it looked very good and very typical of something that they put on, like not over designed, but like quite a racer esque, like almost chavvy early 2000s hot hatch. I think quite a lot of them have become icons with that sort of community these days, but that's the kind of vibe I really, really wanted. I really wanted something that people would look back on in like 20 or 30 or so years and go, yeah, that was really yobbo, we liked that a lot. Like, that was something that was typical of British culture at the time, which is exactly what I was going for here, but also with some essence of Burnout 3. Again, I was really going for something that would fit into the compact series. And I liked it, you know, I thought it looked good. I thought it looked typical of both the compact series and Burnout, and then also of something that was British 2000s, and maybe got some Rover vibes going on here, although Rover did die shortly after this car was built. So also ignore the fact that the reg is an 02 reg and the car was built in 04. It was literally the closest date I could find. So it's just, again, it's one of those things that's meant to be slightly representative of the era. Now putting in the bucket seats, of course, it being a top limited run trim of a car, I really wanted like some proper racer bucket seats, something to really make it stand out. Although the rear seats, those are just normal ones, but they do share the same colorway as the front seats too. So just going ahead and adding those in, add in all the typical parts you see of my basic interiors just to make it look like an interior, and just adding in, I think it's the steering wheels going in now. Wanted the steering shaft on this thing is really long, I've got to say, but yeah, just adding in that racing steering wheel with the red band at the top. I really wanted something that looked, again, a bit more racy, a bit more grippy, so instead of just your normal plastic steering wheel. But finishing off the glass there, look at giving it one final look over, and there we are. This is the MSM Terrier MSR 2004. So feel free to pause your videos if you want, go over the specs here for both these cars. I also made the base model as well, but now we will jump into, as ever, the history segment. I present to you the MSM Terrier MSR and Terrier 1.4, the former of which is a limited run British hot hatch that, in 2004, arrived with one purpose: to scare the big names silly. Just 200 were ever built, each one packing a turbocharged 1.8 litre dual overhead cam inline 4 belting out 207 horsepower, which is more than enough to make the front wheel scramble for traction in first and second gear. Underneath, the MSR wasn't just about brute force. It inherited the Terrier EX's already sharp chassis, but dialed everything up. Stiffer suspension, tighter steering, and a limited slip differential that let you carve corners with surprising poise, and occasionally a touch of torque steer-induced terror. 0 to 60, just 6.7 seconds, and a top speed of 154 miles per hour. All from a 3-door hatch that still had room for all your mates and their questionable taste in takeaway. The MSR's brilliance came not from fancy badges or marketing fluff, but from the way it felt. Even today, it's a revelation on a British B-road, eager, direct and cheeky. And in an age where everything's going hybrid and heavy, it's a reminder of what a proper hot hatch should be. Small, punchy, and just a little bit unhinged. And then there was the Terrier 1.4, same practical shape, same sturdy build, but with the kind of engine output that makes a shopping trolley look sprightly. The naturally aspirated 1.4 litre single overhead cam inline 4 produced just a hair under 90 horsepower, which meant the only way you'd ever see 60 miles per hour in a hurry was if you drove it off a cliff. That said, the Terrier 1.4 did everything a sensible car should: power steering, ABS, a CD player, and safety ratings that reassured parents everywhere. It was for many their first car, or the car they learned to resent. Of course, that hasn't stopped the UK's more, let's say, creative car enthusiasts from fitting oversized exhausts, questionable body kits, and stickers claiming 400 plus horsepower, because nothing says performance quite like a bonnet scoop held on with double-sided tape and glue, and a max power magazine in the passenger seat. Yet together, the MSR and the 1.4 told the whole Terrier story. One side, a limited edition riot, ready to embarrass much pricier metal. The other, a dependable runabout that somehow found itself starring in the world's worst modified car meets. And while the MSR remains the hero, both left their mark on Britain's roads in very different ways. Sometimes, it's not about how many you build, but the memories they leave behind. Hill climb time, here we go with the Terrier 1.4. So, not a lot to say about this car. Again, that will be the theme with most of the base models. As you can see, it does 0 to 60, and yes, you know, it gets there eventually. You know, it doesn't even touch 60 by the time we have to get to braking for the first corner. Suspension feels good, particularly turning in at the front with these base model cars. For whatever reason, they have really good turning. I think it's just because they're not really capable of that much speed. Also on this Goodwood map, the red this car is in is a really bright red. It's like more offensive than Ferrari red. It's like red. Anyway, coming down to the Malcolm corner, it's very composed through here. I actually left the braking really late just to see what it would do, and see if it would scare me, so which doesn't. It's a very capable little car for what it is. I mean, again, it's completely gutless, so you can throw it through the flint wheel section almost without braking. There's a little correction needed, but again, nothing serious. It's just really composed. And then braking up here as well. keeping the momentum on, keeping the revs high, because this car, both versions of this car actually award high revs. They're both, for what they are, very high revving engines, and then powering up to the finish line, only just managing to make it over motorway speeds. It is that gutless, and it comes home with a time of 1 minute 11 seconds .564, which puts it really close behind the Canary, the base model Canary, which really surprised me. I thought it would be much slower. Anyway, onto the MSR. This is the one, of course, we're all excited for. Straight into second gear because it has so much wheel spin. I think it spins through second, so we have to bump it up to third because it just spins and spins and spins. That front LSD definitely doing some work, although it's really having to do a lot of work for this car. Again, 207 turbocharged ponies through just those front wheels alone. No all-wheel drive helping it out like the R-Type had in the previous episode. Coming down the main straight towards Morecambe, it actually goes over 100 miles an hour. This thing is frighteningly quick for a hot hatch. Bear in mind it only weighs just over a ton. I think it's like 1,071 kilos or whatever. Hooks up really nicely through Morecambe as we head up now to the Flint Wall, gaining speed, touches 90, and you get to brake a little bit more for this than you do for the 1.4, of course, but it's through and it's making its way back up to 80 miles per hour. Final real corner here, shift that down to third, keep the revs high, and then you'll just power all the way up until the finish line. This thing is very fun to drive for a front-wheel drive car. Whoever says front-wheel drive cars are boring is a liar, and this thing is very fun when it crosses the line at just over 100 miles an hour with a time of a 1 minute dead .478, which makes it incredibly quick for what it is, and only just under 2 seconds actually slower than the R-Type, which is phenomenal. So now we'll head over to the track. So this car, when it came to the Goodwood section, as I mentioned, was quite sluggish up there, and then when you give it an even wider track, it's even more of, I was going to say, a chore to drive, but I feel like I'm being way too cruel on these base model cars. I feel like they fulfill a purpose, right? They have a duty to serve, and I think they do that very well in terms of being practical and easy to drive. And although through here you can see through the chicane, you can just chuck it through because there's not really much in the way of just car overall to really fight you back. Because of that open front diff, it does spin its wheels quite a bit through corners. You have to let it get turned in, almost lift off quite a lot to let a tiny bit of lift off oversteer take effect before you're back on power. And then the straights on this track are really, I think, what killed its lap time. Of course, you're already gonna probably be expecting it to be at the bottom of the table. Well, spoiler alert, it is the slowest car that we've had so far, but it doesn't mean that it's completely devoid of life. Like, there are certain points where I was thinking, oh, this is quite fun, and when you get sudden understeer, then you lift off and you get sudden oversteer, that's quite quirky, that's quite unique. Although, because it's lacking so much in the power department, you have basically years before you exit the corner to be able to correct its behavior. So it's just very easy to drive. The chicanes, again, just nice and fun. You just let it glide through, and then as it comes out, you're just back on power, and it's, it behaves like a front wheel drive car does. I think it's very akin to, like, for example, the real life Honda Civic, or even maybe Golfs at the time, but just like, because it's just with these cars, it's really interesting to find a talking point with these base model ones, because there's just not a whole lot going on. So, but they're here to show you guys like what where the lineage of these cars, or where the lineups start, and then as we look at the more performance oriented models, where the lineup finishes, and the gap between the lowest performing car in the class, or its family, versus then the highest performing car, or the highest one that I built thus far. Because of course with this with the I almost forgot to say there, with the Terrier and with the Canary in particular as well, there's going to be versions even faster than these ones to see. So, and there we go, crosses the finish line with a 2:32.265, which does make it the slowest of any of the cars we've seen thus far. But considering how down on power this thing is, I'm actually all right with that. Like, I feel like as more cars come along in the future, it will be decent. They'll definitely be slower than that. Anyways, but now here we have the MSR a lot more interesting to drive, and for a front wheel drive car, I know recently Max Verstappen came out and said that front wheel drive cars are like just not fun at all. I would disagree if he got in this, to be fair. I think he'd have a good time with this. Just that limited slip diff in the front really helping out. As you can see there, we almost take that chicane completely flat. It was through there at like 107 miles per hour, and then you're constantly wrestling it through corners. It doesn't actually lift off oversteer nearly as bad as the 1.4. I think that's due in part to the fact this thing actually is running downforce. Not too much downforce. I think it's only about 70 or 80 kilos on both ends, but it's enough to keep it planted through corners and combat that lift off oversteer that you see so much in hot hatches. Anyways, we come down the back straight now. We just get a hair over 120 miles per hour, which for something like this is insane. This thing accelerates so quickly, and I think if it was all-wheel drive, it would be contending for maybe top spot. Although then again, I know the all-wheel drive system would add a lot of weight to it, but like I said, right now it's only a hair over a ton, which I think is part of the reason why it's so fun to drive, and it even breaks a little bit loose through that corner there, which it really keeps you on your toes. But because the beauty of it being all-wheel drive, you can just accelerate and it will straighten out, and that's brilliant because you can then just point it in the direction you want to go, send it next corner, let the tiny bit of lift off oversteer it does have through corners take effect, especially through this long sweeping right here. Then you're up to the slower section now, you're hard on the brakes, throw it through. If I say throw it through, that was kind of a leisurely jaunt through, and then just let a mixture of lift off, oversteer and on power understeer take effect to get you through here. Although being a front wheel drive, there is still definitely a modicum of understeer, as you will hear every time I get on power. It is still fighting for traction in the lower gears. And I'm heading to the final chicane, just through here. Again, not quite a throw through there, but that was definitely more leisurely. But what you're seeing now is the best lap I could get out of this after having a few laps with it. I did crash in a previous attempt, but there we are. So it crosses the line, and we will soon see what the time is. That's the total time. We'll wait for us to see the full time, because it's about midway through standings in total, but we're not looking at total time, we're looking at the individual time, which I'll click on, I presume, in a second. There we go. Right, 2 minutes 10.952, which is a very good showing for a car that is front wheel drive only. Again, it really surprised me, and I love the way this thing drives. I really like the way it handles in general. I think, again, like I've said many times before, for a front wheel drive car it is just nuts. But we shall move to the final standings and see how they stack up. So you join us at the end of yet another testing session, which has brought about some interesting results, and I will also demonstrate the shake-up to the tier system. So first of all is, of course, the Goodwood shootout. As ever, you can see the Terrier 1.4 is at the bottom, with the MSR actually splitting the pack up. I thought for sure it would sit somewhere in the middle, but I didn't realise how good it would actually be for a front-wheel drive car. Lap times, very similar story. Terrier 1.4 at the bottom and the MSR in the middle. And here is the shake-up, which is to the actual class system. So now it's split into 6 distinct classes, which will help keep everything together a bit better and also give you larger classes. So feel free to pause your videos here if you want to see how they stack up with each other. And I should mention, what actually defines where a car sits in a tier is that it has to be 3 seconds, or within 3 seconds of the car above it or below it, to fall into the same tier. If it's aside or apart from lots of other times, then it will go into its own separate tier. So that is how the tier system works for these classes. There are 6 distinct classes now, that being Street, Tuner/Sport, Elite, Super, Track and Off-Road, and they will culminate all of the vehicles we see moving forward, and hopefully should give us a lot more cars in the individual tier lists. But as always, thank you very much for watching. I do hope this has been entertaining, and also want to say a big thank you to everybody who watched the previous video. We got over 150 views on that one at the time of recording, so that really does mean a lot, and I'm really super chuffed with that, and I would love to continue making videos for you guys. But yeah, join us next time, where we will probably be building something a little bit larger, but whatever that is, you'll have to wait and see. Thank you very much for watching, and take care.